I have a confession to make. I absolutely love practicing. I haven't always loved practicing, but having learnt a lot about how practice works and how to do it effectively, I now really, really enjoy it. And I'd like to use this video to share some of the things that I've learnt that work really well. The main thing that I'd like to talk to you about is how to use goal setting really effectively in your practice. So there's some really good research about the interplay between rewards and motivation. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about that, then I'd recommend that you go and watch Dan Pink's video, his TED Talk about motivation. The important thing to understand is that we have two kinds of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. So extrinsic motivation, a really good example of that is a sticker chart. It's all the jobs that we do for someone else or for something else. So maybe you do some chores in return for your pocket money. That would be an extrinsic motivation. If you do some chores because you just love the way that the kitchen looks when it's really, really clean, then that's more on your intrinsic motivation side. Now, intrinsic motivation has three main strands to it. The first is autonomy, the second is mastery, and the third is purpose. I'm going to talk you through a couple of examples of effective goal setting that really tap in to that purpose. Because when you're practicing an instrument, you're already working on mastery. And then we'll talk about autonomy a tiny bit as well. Okay, so you're probably already familiar with SMART goals. You've probably used them in school for projects or something like that. And so you'll know that they are goals which are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So an example of a SMART goal in your practice might be to memorise G major 2-octave scales with slurred bowing by your next viola lesson, which is in 6 days' time. Great. It's specific, it's measurable, you'll either be able to play it without looking at the music or not. It's achievable because you've already played G major 2 octaves, so you're just doing the memorising bit. It's realistic because if you can already play G major, you can probably do it from memory in a week. And it's time bound. You've said it's a week. Okay, great. Lovely SMART goal. But it's maybe not really that important to you. You probably don't have that intrinsic motivation yet. There's not something in you which is burning with desire to be able to do that by next week. So there is another version of SMART goals, which I learnt from Jess Rogers, who's a life coach, which is slightly different. The really exciting thing about the way that Jess uses SMART goals is that she taps into that purpose aspect that I mentioned of your intrinsic motivation. So an example of a goal that you might have is to get as good at the viola as possible, which sounds exciting, doesn't it? Can you imagine being able to play every viola piece in the world, just being able to play it? Sounds lovely. I'm excited about that, but it's not really very realistic. Maybe. Is a lifetime long enough to learn every viola piece ever? It's definitely not specific or measurable, really. So it's not a SMART goal, but it would count as what Jess describes as a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG, that idea of being the best that you can be. And the way that we get closer to achieving a BHAG is through a series of SMART goals. So one of the smaller goals that you might have on your way to being the best viola player that you can be, if you're still at school, maybe you would like to pass grade 8 before you leave school. That seems fairly specific. It's an exam, measurable, it's an exam. And you've got a time limit on there because it's before you leave school. But it's not necessarily realistic or achievable because I don't know how old you are, I don't know how many years you've got left at school, I don't know how long you've been playing the viola already and how close you are to that and what your time frame is. So it's not quite a SMART goal. But if we drill into it and we understand the components of the exam and your personal strengths and weaknesses, then we can come up with a series of effective SMART goals which are going to get you to that bigger goal of your grade 8. And we're also going to address that idea of purpose, which is fundamental to our intrinsic motivation, which is what's going to actually get us to do it. The first thing about a SMART goal is you want it to, ideally, you should be able to complete it in 2 to 4 weeks. So grade 8 is never going to be a SMART goal. It's always going to be a bigger goal. So we could use the example of memorising all of your scales and arpeggios that start on E by the end of July. So boom, specific, measurable, you're moving one step closer to having learned all of the scales that you'll need for your exam. So next, art, ART, this is where it gets exciting. We're going to switch our A to accountable. Who is going to help you achieve this? And who does success depend on? Acknowledging that no one can play your scales for you, you've got to do it. Fundamentally, you personally are accountable for your scales is step 1. And step 2 is looking outside of yourself and thinking, who have I got in my life who might come along with me and make it a little bit easier? Maybe you've got a friend who's also working for an exam and you can learn your scales together. You can compare notes, you can catch up with each other, you can check in. Your teacher is probably going to help you learn your scales, and they'll ask you to play them in the lesson and you'll be accountable in that way. And probably your parents as well can, another source of accountability, because they're with you every day, and they'll know if you're practicing or not, and they'll hear you playing your scales or not, and they can just very gently just check in and see how they're going. Have you done them today? Is there some help that you need with organising your time that means that you'll get them done? So that's accountable. Then we're on to resonant and thrilling. This is the real purpose. R is for resonant, and that's understanding what the point of learning scales is at all, and why in July. If you want to do your grade 8 at Christmas, maybe your exam will be in November, that's a really long time away. Why am I learning all of my scales that start on E right now? You can't do your best in the exam if you haven't learnt your scales thoroughly. And there are 4 keys, plus a couple of double stop scales. If you're learning 1 a month, that only gives you 1 spare month between July now and November. So actually, kind of need to crack on if you're serious. And you want to be able to keep working on pieces and oral, so you could leave your scales all to the last minute and do them in a month. But you'll have a much more comfortable ride if you spread them out. So understanding how these scales fit into your longer term project is that resonant bit. And then thrilling, which is our final component. I would like you to imagine how you're going to feel in October when you know that you can play all of your scales and your exam is still 4, 5, 6 weeks away. You're going to feel pretty good. You're going to be feeling pretty confident. That's your first thrilling bit. That's the first exciting bit. Now imagine how you feel. You're in your exam. You've played your pieces. They went well. Your accompanist has left the room. You're on your own, and the examiner says, 3 octave dominant 7th in the key of A with slurp bows. You hear that, and you lift your viola to your shoulder, thinking, I can play this. You know you can play it. You've been playing it for 6 months already. It's so exciting to know I can play that. I can play them all. Bossing my scales. And then the final component that I find really exciting about scales is knowing how much music that you want to play that's not on the grade 8, all the orchestra pieces, all the pieces after grade 8, all of the rest of the life pieces, every other piece, they're built on scales and arpeggios. If you're nailing your scales and arpeggios, all of those pieces are going to unfold themselves so much more easily, so much more pleasurably for you because you've got that facility. And that's what's really exciting about learning your scales today and this month. So there's your SMART goal: specific, measurable, accountable, resonant, and thrilling. I think I'm going to go and play some scales myself now.